Assalamu alaikum fam, hope you're doing fantastic. So, let's continue our reading of the Federalist Papers. What I really like about this is that it really breaks down some of the founding principles of America, what the founding fathers had envisioned, and really highlights their wisdom beyond the fact of them just being slave owners, which is a reduction of just unnecessary proportions. They have a lot of fantastic principles and ideas that all political scientists should study instead of minimizing. So let's continue our overall textual analysis and overall book review of this wonderful book. This is essay number 24 by Alexander Hamilton, and it's titled "The Powers Necessary to the Common Defense Further Considered." And you know how great he is with his titles, so let's begin. To the powers proposed to be conferred upon the federal government in respect to the creation and direction of the national forces, I have met with but one specific objection, which, if I understand it rightly, is this: that proper provision has not been made against the existence of standing armies in times of peace. Okay, so that proper provision has not been made against the existence of standing armies. If you remember, the British had some standing armies, and the soldiers used to kind of go inside of people's homes, and there was a problem in the colonies at that time. So what powers are going to be given to the federal government, right? So he says powers proposed to be conferred, which means what are they going to be granted? What kind of power is the federal government going to be granted, you see? One specific objection. So it's like one thing that's he's going to, say, hey. An objection which I shall now endeavor to show rests on weak and unsubstantial foundations. Okay, so he's going to try to expose how this objection isn't really well founded, and it's not really that strong of an argument. So let's see what he says. It has indeed been brought forward in the most vague and general form, supported only by bold assertions without the appearance of argument. Oh, look what he said. So it's brought forward, it's vague, meaning it doesn't have a lot of details, not very uber specific, and it's general, right? So vague, general, it's not concise, specific, right? Specialized, on point, you follow? And so he says bold assertions. So it's like, if you're going to say something bold, you need to have specific examples to support what you're saying. So he's saying it lacks that. And that it lacks the appearance of even an argument, right? So an assertion that it was bold but yet has no argument to back it up. You follow? Without even the sanction of theoretical opinions. Oh my gosh. Okay, so without even the sanction of theoretical opinions. So this bold assertion is vague and it's general, doesn't even have the appearance of an argument, and it doesn't even have a standing on theoretical aims as well. You see? So it's like theoretical opinions, so it lacks that. It doesn't even have theoretical opinions attached to it. So this objection is, like he said, weak. He's laid it out quite clear. In contradiction to the practice of other free nations, and to the general sense of America, as expressed in most of the existing constitutions. The propriety of this remark will appear the moment it is recollected that the objection under consideration turns upon a supposed necessity of restraining the legislative authority. Okay, so notice this, so restraining the legislative authority. So there's a legislative branch, don't forget, of the nation. So the legislative branch at the federal level, you get it? In the article of military establishments, a principle unheard of, except in one or two of our state constitutions, and rejected in all the rest. So he's really laying it out how there is not a consensus, right? A stranger to our politics, who was to read our newspapers at the present juncture. So present juncture is like where they're coming at, right? What they're talking about, the matter at hand, without having previously inspected the plan reported by the convention, would be naturally led to one of two conclusions. Okay, so let's see what the two conclusions are. Either that it contained a positive injunction and standing armies should be kept up in times of peace, or that it vested in the executive the whole power of levying troops without subjecting his discretion in any shape to the control of the legislature. This is important because right now this is really important because Harris and them, because of the capital issue, they have some soldiers there. They might have been sent back by now. But for a while they had like a lot of troops stationed there, which is like an active standing army. And that's a little bit weird. They don't deploy their troops to defend the businesses that are being looted and burned and riots. And they only did it for a tiny little event that it was over the same day, right? It got out of hand. It really isn't that big of a deal, but they're milking it and using that to explain why they need to have a standing army. And the National Guard was there, right? So here, try to think about today and how they're doing it. Here was the time of the British, right? And they wanted to make sure that, hey, who's it gonna be with? The legislative branch or the executive branch? And who gets to decide who can call in troops and who can say they have to go? You get it? You follow? Living troops. If he came afterwards to pursue the plan itself, he would be surprised to discover that neither the one nor the other was the case, that the whole power of raising armies was lodged in the legislature. Okay, so whole power of raising armies lodged in the legislature, not in the executive. That this legislature was to be a popular body, so the legislative branch being of a popular body, so you see that? Consisting of the representatives of the people periodically elected. So popular body would mean in political science terms, people who were elected periodically. So hopefully, unlike today, we have bureaucrats who are like Joe Biden's been in office for years, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, and that's part of the reason why there's so much corruption is because people are not really involved and we can't get them out, and it's quite sad. But here it's like the legislative branch being populist, people having representatives sent there to it, you see? And that instead of the provision he had supposed in favor of standing armies, there was to be found in respect to this object an important qualification, even of the legislative discretion, in that clause which forbids the appropriation of money for the support of an army for any longer period than 2 years. Aha, look at that. So, that's an interesting way. So, legislative discretion, the clause meaning like there's going to be something in the bill, the legislative branch that says, hey, you cannot have money given to you to support an army for longer than 2 years. Did you follow that? So, the clause within the bill would be, you cannot receive funding to support your standing army for a period longer than 2 years. A precaution, which upon a nearer view of it will appear to be a great and real security against military establishments without evident necessity. Haha, so you see that? So, a real security. So, by having such a clause, you would be able to prevent a military state from arising. So, you see that? How he wanted Hamilton security against a military type of dictatorship, to where you could not have a standing army, because if you have too much of a standing army for too long, then you're gonna start getting a little bit weird there. You see the risk? Disappointed in his first surmise, the person I have supposed will be apt to pursue his conjectures a little further. He would naturally say to himself, it is impossible that all this vehement and pathetic declamation the way he said that, vehement, so it's like just it's coming out with force. Declamation, he's good with his rhetoric, can be without some correlable pretext. It must needs be that this people, so jealous of their liberties, have, in all the preceding models of the constitutions which they have established, inserted the most precise and rigid precautions on this point. Now follow this. Did you see that? Jealous of their liberties. Today, people signed away their liberties ever since 2000s. Just take it. Your apps are also taking away the liberties with your data mining and other such factors. Then with this recent plague, mini plague, people allowed so many of their liberties to be taken. And it's like today there's like a competition, like how can we take away as many liberties as possible, it would appear. And people are not jealous of their liberties at all today. They're not. That's why you're getting soft communism coming in. Regardless of how the woke left denies it, yet they promote it. Whatever. Now he said rigid precautions. Precise and rigid precautions. You see how he said in the previous section, real security against military establishments, and then here, precise, rigid precautions. So here, you really can see how the founders were very apt to make sure the federal government didn't become tyrannical and abusive of its own people, really keeping them in point. That's the difference between what the founders wanted and then what the liberals today want with a sort of communism, where it's like, you're gonna get into some problems here, some problems. The omission of which in the new plan has given birth to all this apprehension and clamor. If, under this impression, he proceeded to pass in review the several state constitutions, how great would be his disappointment to find that two only of them contain an interdiction of standing armies in time of peace. Okay, so contain an interdiction. And the topic is standing armies. Now, this is interesting because it depends who's in the executive branch for me personally. Because if there's a standing army during a time of peace and they're smashing out gangbangers, beautiful. Beautiful. Smash them out. Chase the rats out of the street. Yet we do realize that it can cause problems, right? This can be an issue, essentially. So, you don't want somebody to cause some problems. It's hard. It's hard because the risk of fascism would be real, right? So you'd really have to trust the legislative branch or the executive. You'd have to really have some good people in power to watch that. Still, however, he would be persuaded that there must be some plausible foundation for the cry raised on his head. Okay, so look at that. The cry raised on the head. He would never be able to imagine, while any source of information remained unexplored, that it was nothing more than the experiment upon the public credulity. So look at that. Public credulity, the public credit. So, dictated either by a deliberate intention to deceive. So, dictated meaning, told to them and written down with the intention to deliberately deceive. Or by the overflowing of zeal to intemperate, to be ingenuous. So, overflowing of zeal. So, zeal is like energy. You're coming for just overflowing zeal. And it's intemperate, so it can't calm down. So, did you see how he worded that? So, dictated by deliberate intention to deceive. So, deliberately not being honest. And then an overwhelming just force of pushing, and that's just heated, and it's not genuine. You follow? Beautiful with his rhetoric here. It would probably occur to him that he would be likely to find the precautions he was in search of in the primitive compact between the states. I like how he said primitive compact. Here at length he would expect to meet with a solution of the enigma. No doubt he would observe to himself the existing confederation must contain the most explicit provisions against military establishments in times of peace. Okay, so in a confederate system, he argues, you would have to have very clear, like, hey, what's going to be? If it's going to be against having militaries out in times of peace, it must be completely explicit. So it could not be vague. It could not be, left up to one's own interpretation. It has to be very, hey, these are your restrictions, deal with it. And a departure from this motto and a favorite point has occasioned the discontent which appears to influence these political champions. Political champions. So, I mean, it is interesting. So remember, legislator, if it was to be a popular body, we have levying troops, the whole power, either with the control of the legislature, or is it going to be vested in the executive? Okay? Very, very interesting. Yes. What do you think, fam?